Friday nights at Hale's place always felt like stepping into a storm. Neon lights pulsed in red and blue, music pounded like a restless heartbeat, and voices rose and crashed against each other in drunken waves. Glasses clinked, laughter turned to shouting, and somewhere in the corner someone was always too drunk to notice their song was off-key. For most, it was chaos. For Christine Carter, it was survival. Christine moved through the bar like she had done 100 nights before. Fast, precise, invisible. Her blonde hair was tied back in a no-nonsense bun, her black apron stained with syrup and sweat, sneakers worn thin at the toes. No lipstick, no flirting, no lingering conversations. She wasn't here to belong. She wasn't here to play. She was here to work. Every order scribbled on her pad, every spill wiped before it spread, every drink mixed without hesitation. It was muscle memory now. Work, endure, repeat. There had been a time when Christine thought her life would look different. A third-year psychology student, she had dreamed of helping people heal, of understanding the broken places inside others because she knew what those places felt like herself. But then came her mother's diagnosis, cancer that ate through savings, through hope, through Christine's every chance at finishing school. She dropped out. She worked doubles at diners, cleaned houses, then ended up here, in a place where the music never stopped and no one ever asked about your past. Her mother had passed 6 months after Christine left school, just the two of them until the end, and now just one. Ever since, every day felt like autopilot. Wake up, put on the apron, keep breathing, keep paying bills, keep going. Her fridge at home held expired yogurt and half a bottle of hot sauce. Her apartment echoed with a silence she tried not to notice. Christine had rules for herself. Never drink with customers, never stay after her shift, never give out her number. Keep her head down, keep moving. Protect the fragile pieces of herself no one saw, because she had learned young, back when she was 10 years old, hiding behind the couch while her father was beaten bloody for trying to stop a neighbor's rage, that no one was coming to save you. If you wanted to survive, you had to step in, you had to fight back, you had to stand tall even when your knees shook. That night at Hale's place, Christine thought it would be just another endless shift, another blur of noise and spilled whiskey. She had no way of knowing that a stranger in the corner booth was about to change everything. The night had reached that point where the air inside Hale's place felt heavy, saturated with alcohol and adrenaline. The neon lights flickered across damp faces, the music thumped low and relentless, and Christine could sense the tension beginning to shift. She had worked here long enough to recognize the rhythm of a fight before it broke out, the way voices tilted sharper, the way laughter turned into baiting, the way a crowd leaned closer like moths to flame. That was when she noticed him, the man in the corner booth. She had seen him before, always alone, always quiet, never sloppy or loud. Tonight, he wore a dark hoodie, pushed back just enough to reveal a sharp jawline and eyes that seemed to see everything without needing to move. He wasn't drinking fast, just sipping slowly, like he was measuring the room rather than enjoying it. Christine didn't know his name, but she knew his type, the still ones, the kind who drew attention not by demanding it, but by refusing to. And in a place like this, stillness was a challenge. It didn't take long. 3 men at the bar, already half gone on shots, noticed him. Their voices grew louder, their shoulders squaring as they traded smirks. Christine's stomach tightened. She'd seen this before. Weakness disguised as bravado, the kind of insecurity that needed to break someone else to feel strong. The biggest of the three staggered forward, his boots dragging against the sticky floor. He jabbed a thick finger toward the booth. "Hey, tough guy," he slurred, words dripping with malice. "You think you're better than us? Sitting there quiet like you own the place?" The man in the booth didn't answer. He didn't flinch. His hand stayed calmly around his glass. That was all it took. The silence, the refusal to play, only fueled the fire. Christine froze, tray balanced in one hand. The scene unfolded in a heartbeat that felt like déjà vu, her father stepping in years ago, trying to stop violence, only to be beaten down while she hid behind a couch. She had been powerless then. She had screamed for help and no one had come, but she wasn't 10 anymore. And this time she wasn't going to watch. She moved. "Hey!" Christine's voice cut through the noise as she stepped between them, her body blocking the man in the booth. She forced a casual smile, as if nothing was wrong. "Back bar's got a new whiskey tasting. Free for the first 5. You boys look like you could use something smoother. 2 of them faltered, eyes flickering with interest, but the leader wasn't listening. His gaze burned past Christine, locked onto the silent man behind her. You too good to talk to me? The drunk spat, stepping closer, his arm cocking back. Christine saw it before it happened. The telegraphed movement, the clumsy rage. Her tray hit the floor with a crash, shattering glass loud enough to snap heads around the bar. In the same motion, she drove her elbow into the man's side, right under the ribcage. Not enough to injure, but enough to steal his breath. He stumbled, cursing, face turning red as he tried to recover. You just assaulted me, he barked, voice high with indignation. Christine stood her ground, eyes locked on his. No, she said coolly, her voice steady. You were about to assault someone. I stopped you. The man's fists clenched. The crowd had gone quiet, phones already raised, eyes wide. Christine leaned in, her voice low and sharp enough to cut. If you throw one more punch in this bar, I will make sure you don't walk out of here tonight. Your choice. For a moment, the whole bar held its breath. The man's face twisted between fury and hesitation, but the weight of the watching crowd pressed down harder than his pride. With a curse, he shoved past Christine and stormed toward the exit, his friends scrambling after him, murmuring excuses. Silence lingered like smoke for a few seconds. Then the music swelled again. People laughed too loudly and the bar exhaled. Christine bent down, gathering the broken glass, her heart still pounding but her hands steady. She didn't look at the man in the booth until she stood again. He was watching her, those unreadable eyes studying her face. You okay? She asked, brushing glass dust from her apron. He nodded slowly. Thanks. His voice was low, calm, as if the fight hadn't rattled him at all. Christine gave a small shrug. Next time, sit closer to the bar. The faintest ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Noted, and just like that, Christine turned back to her work. Another table needed clearing. Another drink needed pouring. But something inside her shifted, subtle and unsettling, because for the first time in a long while, someone had looked at her, not as a waitress, not as background, not as someone invisible. He had really seen her, and that, more than the fight, was what made her chest ache as she walked away. The following week blurred into the usual grind, sticky floors, spilled drinks, laughter edged with aggression. To Christine, it was all background noise, another storm she had to navigate night after night. She told herself she had forgotten about the man in the hoodie, the one with quiet eyes who sat in the booth like he belonged to another world. She told herself it was just another fight she had stopped, another scar in a lifetime of them. But sometimes when the music dipped and the bar hummed low, she caught herself glancing toward the corner booth, half expecting him to be there. He wasn't. By Thursday night, Christine was working on autopilot, her sneakers sticking slightly with every step as she carried a tray stacked with empty pint glasses. Her shift was almost over when her manager, a stocky man with thinning hair and a permanent frown, waved her over. Carter, he said flatly. Got a minute? Her stomach dropped. Those words rarely meant anything good. She set her tray aside, wiped her hands on her apron, and followed him upstairs to the cramped office above the stockroom. The room smelled faintly of old liquor and burnt coffee. Papers were stacked in uneven piles. A clock ticked too loudly on the wall. Christine stood in front of his desk, trying not to look nervous. You're not in trouble, the manager said, catching her stiff posture. Relax. Christine exhaled, though her arms stayed folded across her chest. Then what is this? He pulled a piece of paper from a file and slid it across the desk. The letterhead read Halen Company Corporate Office. Christine blinked. Corporate? He nodded. Apparently one of our customers last Friday is, let's just say, a VIP. Big deal. Wrote in about how you handled that little situation at the bar. Christine frowned. The fight? Yeah. Said you prevented an incident before it escalated. Efficient, calm, smart. That's the exact wording. He tapped the page. Corporate thought it was worth passing along. Christine read the note again slowly. It was short, almost impersonal, typed on a standard form. No name, no signature, just praise that felt both distant and strangely pointed. Your staff made a difficult situation disappear before it escalated. Efficient, calm, smart. Her chest tightened. For so long, no one had noticed the way she survived every night, how she worked without complaint, kept her head down, and carried on. Now here was proof that someone had. The manager leaned back in his chair. There's more. They recommended you for shift lead training. Not a guarantee, but you're on the list. Christine stared at him. The words barely made sense. Shift lead. It wasn't a huge promotion, just a small step up, more hours, a little more pay, a different color name tag. But in her world, where every dollar was stretched thin, where every day felt like a loop that never broke, even the smallest opening felt monumental. Why now? She murmured, almost to herself. The manager shrugged. Right place, right time, Carter, take the win. He turned back to his computer, already dismissing her. Christine picked up the paper, folding it neatly before leaving the office. Back downstairs, the bar lights buzzed back to life for the night shift. Music thumped, voices rose, and customers crowded the tables. Christine stood for a moment in the doorway, the folded paper still warm in her hand. No one else knew. To everyone else, she was still the waitress with the tired eyes and the no-nonsense bun, the one who didn't flirt, didn't laugh, didn't linger. But tucked in her apron pocket was something new, something fragile, acknowledgement. She worked her shift as always, jotting orders, wiping spills, mixing drinks, but her mind kept drifting back to the letter. Somewhere out there, someone had watched her, really watched, and thought she was worth more than survival. That night on her break, Christine sat outside the back door on the cracked plastic crate she always used. The alley smelled faintly of stale beer and rain. She lit a cigarette she knew she wouldn't finish, the smoke curling into the cold night air. For the first time in a long while, she let herself imagine. What if she did the training? What if she became shift lead? What if she didn't stay invisible forever? Her mother's voice came back to her then, fragile and soft, from nights long ago in the hospital when Christine would sit by her bedside. Promise me you'll finish school. Promise me you'll keep moving forward. Christine swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in her eyes. She hadn't finished school. Life had stolen that from her, but maybe, just maybe, she could still move forward. She stubbed out the cigarette, tucked the folded paper back into her apron, and went inside. The music hit her like a wave, but this time it didn't drown her. For the first time in years, Christine allowed herself one dangerous thought. Maybe things don't always stay the same forever. 2 weeks passed before she saw him again. By then, the corner booth had become a ghost to Christine, a place her eyes betrayed her by wandering to whenever the music dipped low or the crowd grew restless. She told herself she didn't care. She had bills to pay, classes she could barely afford, and a body too tired to carry more questions about strangers. Still, when she walked past that booth, there was always a sliver of hope, quickly smothered. Until one Thursday night, the bar was buzzing, packed tighter than usual. Christine balanced a tray of empty glasses against her hip, weaving through the chaos. She didn't notice him at first. He blended into the noise, dressed down in a hoodie again, beard softening the sharpness of his jaw. He wasn't drinking much, just sitting, waiting. It wasn't until her third pass that she felt his eyes on her, not the invasive stare of a drunk, not the lingering look she was used to dodging, something steadier, quieter, almost like he was listening without words. When she finally looked at him directly, he shifted slightly, blending back into shadow. She let it go. Customers came and went. She didn't have the energy to give weight to one more face. But later, as the rush thinned, Christine noticed something. Near the jukebox, a teenage girl sat crying into her drink, shoulders hunched in humiliation. Most of the bar didn't notice. Those who did ignored it. Christine, without hesitation, slid a napkin toward the girl, set a glass of water in front of her, and walked away without a word. No spotlight, no pity, just quiet kindness. When Christine came back through, she caught a flicker of movement. The man in the booth had watched the entire thing. His expression hadn't changed much, but there was a focus in his gaze, as if she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. An hour later, near last call, Christine stepped outside for her usual smoke break. The alley was cold, damp, the flickering street lamp painting her in yellow light. She lit a cigarette she'd only half finished, leaning against the wall. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't alone. He was there, leaning against the opposite wall, hands tucked into his pockets. He didn't speak at first. Neither did she. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just strange, like both were waiting to see if the other would break it. You always give your tips away? His voice was low, steady. Christine blinked. You followed me? He shook his head. I was already out here. Saw you give that man in the alley $5 earlier. No one else noticed. Christine's jaw tightened. Sometimes people need it more than I do. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the neon glow from the bar bleeding into the dark alley. Finally, he extended a hand, hesitant but deliberate. Ryan. Christine glanced at his hand, then at his face. She hesitated, then shook it. Christine. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Ryan came back. Not every night, not on a schedule, just often enough that she noticed. He always sat in the same booth, ordered one drink, never asked for another. He didn't flirt, he didn't pry. He just talked. It started with books. Christine was stacking a few old paperbacks behind the bar, one's customers left behind. Ryan nodded toward The Old Man and the Sea. You ever read it? She snorted. Tried, got lost in all the fish metaphors. He chuckled softly. That's the point. Well, she said, raising an eyebrow, maybe I wasn't ready for the point. And just like that, something cracked open. Their conversations grew slowly, like ivy creeping up brick walls. They spoke of solitude, of memories that pressed themselves into your bones, of people who disappeared and left silence in their place. Ryan mentioned a brother once, his voice low, eyes fixed on his drink. Matt used to get in fights, he said, not because he was angry, just small. Easy to pick on. Christine didn't interrupt. I stepped in once, Ryan continued. Didn't end well. He stopped talking to me after that. Stopped trusting anyone. Ryan didn't say more. He didn't have to. Christine knew how silence could hold more pain than words. One night she told him about her mother, not the cancer, not the hospital nights, just her mother's voice. People show you their hearts when they're not trying. The loudest person in the room is often the loneliest. Ryan looked at her, then really looked. She sounds like she was a beautiful person. She was, Christine whispered, until she was just tired. They didn't need to name their grief. It sat quietly between them, understood. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. He'd sit in his booth, she'd move through the bar, and for a few minutes their silence overlapped, comfortable, steady, like a truce with the noise around them. One evening, close to closing, Christine was wiping down the table next to his booth. Ryan reached to move his glass at the same moment her hand brushed the edge. Their fingers touched. Brief, warm, electric. Both froze. Christine's hand lingered an extra heartbeat before pulling back. Their eyes met, and in that small, fragile moment, recognition passed between them. Not attraction, not yet recognition. Two people, different storms, but the same kind of rain. Christine looked away first. Cheeks flushed, heart pounding louder than the music. She finished wiping the table, turned back to her work. Ryan stayed a little longer that night, not to drink, not to talk, but simply to sit in the quiet, as if being near her was enough. It was a gray afternoon, the kind that made the city feel suspended between rain and silence. Christine had stopped by the corner market to grab a cheap sandwich and a pack of instant noodles before her night shift. She stood in line, eyes glazed, half listening to the crackle of the fluorescent lights above. That was when her gaze drifted to the rack of magazines near the register. Her heart stalled. There, on the front page of a national business feature, was his face, Ryan. The headline screamed, "Ryan Hale, the young CEO behind America's fastest-growing bar chain." The photo showed him in a tailored suit, standing in front of a gleaming glass building with the Hale & Company logo burning in gold behind him. His jaw looked sharper, his posture commanding, his expression the exact opposite of the quiet man who nursed a single drink in her section week after week. Christine's stomach clenched. She grabbed the paper, tossed a crumpled bill at the cashier, and shoved it into her bag as if it were evidence of a crime. Back in her apartment, she sat at her tiny kitchen table, the newspaper spread out like a betrayal in ink. She stared at his face, the bold headline, the story about a man who had built an empire from scratch, who commanded boardrooms, who was respected, feared, admired. And yet he had sat in her booth, hoodie pulled low, pretending to be no one, pretending to be someone she could talk to. Her hands trembled. He hadn't lied, not outright. But he hadn't told the truth either. Every night they had talked about grief, about family, about loneliness, and the whole time he had held back the biggest piece of himself. He knew who he was. She didn't. That changed everything. By the time her shift started, Her anger had crystallized into something cold and sharp. The bar was its usual chaos. Neon lights flashing across damp walls, the air heavy with spilled liquor and stale smoke. Christine worked like a machine, her jaw tight, her apron strings digging into her waist. And then he walked in. Ryan, hoodie unzipped halfway, hands in his pockets like nothing had changed. Christine's pulse thudded, but she forced herself to keep moving, pouring drinks, wiping counters, pretending not to notice him. She didn't bring him his usual. She didn't stop at his booth. She waited until the noise was loud enough to cover her voice, until the music swelled just high enough that the whole bar wouldn't hear her break. Then she walked over, dropped the folded newspaper on the table in front of him. His eyes flicked down. He didn't flinch, didn't even pretend to be surprised. "Is this true?" Christine's voice was low, taut. Ryan lifted his gaze, calm as ever. "Yes." Her throat tightened. "You're the CEO of this place, of all of this. And you've been sitting here like some drifter, letting me talk about broken dreams while you already have everything." "I don't have everything," he said quietly. She ignored him, her voice rising. "Was this some kind of test? See if the poor barmaid has character? Or maybe you just wanted a bit of fun? Slum it for a while." Ryan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "No, that's not what this is." "Then what is it, Ryan?" Her voice cracked despite herself. "Because it sure as hell feels like manipulation." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, his eyes steady on hers. "I came here because I was tired. Tired of being a name, a title, a number on a screen. I needed a place where no one expected anything from me. Where I could just be me." Christine folded her arms tightly across her chest, trying to hold herself together. "And you picked my bar, sat in my section. Let me open up to you while you held back everything." "I didn't lie," he said softly. "You didn't have to," she snapped. "You just let me believe you were something you weren't." For the first time, his composure wavered. His voice dropped, raw. "I wanted you to see the man, Christine. Not the CEO, not the money, not the company. Just me. I never planned for this to happen. I just liked talking to you, listening to you. You made me feel real again." Her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. "I don't need saving," she whispered, voice trembling. "I don't need a man with a title and a company. I just needed someone real." "I was real," he said, his words almost breaking. "With you, I was more real than I've been in years. But the damage was already done." Christine stepped back, shaking her head. "I need space. Don't come here for a while." Ryan stood slowly, his face unreadable, though his shoulders seemed heavier than she had ever seen. He gave a single nod. "I understand." He left without another word. The door swung shut behind him, and Christine felt something tear inside her chest. Not just anger, not just betrayal, something worse, something that felt dangerously close to loss. That night she cleaned the bar on autopilot, every spill wiped, every glass stacked, every surface polished until it gleamed, but nothing erased the ghost of his presence in that corner booth. The silence he left behind was louder than the music, heavier than the crowd. For the first time in a long while, Christine realized she had let someone in. And now that he was gone, the emptiness felt unbearable. The days that followed were heavier than usual. Christine moved through her shifts like a shadow, pouring drinks, clearing tables, writing down orders with a hand that felt detached from the rest of her. The noise of the bar, the pulsing music, the drunken laughter that once blurred into routine now grated against her skin like sandpaper, because every corner reminded her of him. The booth sat empty, night after night, as if it too were waiting, and Christine hated herself for glancing at it, for noticing, for caring. She began trading shifts, avoiding nights when she thought he might return. Not that he did. Ryan kept his distance, and yet his absence filled the room like static. Every time the door opened, Christine's chest tightened, expecting him, then deflated again when it wasn't. She hated that most of all, the hope. At home, the silence pressed harder. Her small apartment felt too big, the refrigerator too empty, the air too still. She found herself cleaning the same counter 3 times in a row, rearranging books she had already read, staring at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged her under. One rainy afternoon, after another restless night, Christine dug through an old box shoved under her bed. Inside lay her sketchbook, its cover frayed, pages curling at the edges. It had been years since she'd opened it. The last time was during her mother's illness. Long nights in the hospital when drawing was the only way to slow the ache of time. Her fingers traced the worn cover. Then, almost without thinking, she opened to a blank page. The pencil felt awkward in her hand at first, like holding a memory she'd forgotten how to use. She started with lines, rough shapes, nothing intentional. But soon shadows began to form. She drew the corner booth from memory, the way the light fell across it, the outline of a glass half full, the slight curve of his shoulders as he leaned in, listening more than speaking. And then his eyes. She shaded them carefully, dark and steady, the kind of eyes that had seen too much yet carried something unspoken. Loneliness. That was it. Loneliness that matched her own. Christine set the pencil down, staring at the sketch. Her chest tightened. It wasn't about missing him, not exactly. It was about recognition. She had thought he'd been hiding, deceiving her. But looking at the drawing, she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. He hadn't been hiding. He had been surviving, just like her. They had both walked into that bar wearing masks, not to trick each other, but to protect themselves. From expectations, from judgment, from the fragile places inside that still bled when touched. Maybe without realizing it, they had been each other's mirrors. Christine leaned back, wiping her smudged fingers on her jeans. Her throat ached as she whispered into the empty room, "Why did I think I was the only one hurting?" For the first time in weeks, she felt something shift inside. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The line between truth and survival wasn't always clean. Sometimes silence wasn't a lie. Sometimes it was the only way a person knew how to keep breathing. That night, after her shift, Christine walked past Hale's place instead of going straight home. The neon lights buzzed faintly in the drizzle. Through the window, she could see another bartender working the register, a young guy humming to himself as he cleaned. The corner booth was empty, waiting like always. Christine didn't go inside. Not yet. She stood there in the rain for a long while, clutching her sketchbook under her arm. She wasn't ready to forgive. She wasn't ready to let him back in. But she also couldn't pretend he hadn't mattered. Not love, not yet, but something real, something unfinished, something waiting. As the rain came down harder, Christine turned and walked home. In her apartment, she laid the sketchbook open on the table, staring at the drawing of him alone in the booth. Then, slowly, she began to add another figure, herself, standing just a few steps away, not reaching yet, not touching, just present. And for the first time since Ryan had left, Christine allowed herself a dangerous, fragile thought. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the question neither of them had answered yet. The rain fell hard that night, turning the streets into rivers of silver and shadow. Christine's shift had run long. One of the bartenders had called in sick, the dishwasher jammed again, and by the time she finally clocked out, her clothes smelled of beer and bleach, her body aching from 12 hours on her feet. She walked quickly, head down, keys clenched between her fingers, the storm pressing in all around her. Then she saw him. Ryan was standing at the foot of her apartment steps, drenched. No umbrella, no jacket, just a soaked hoodie clinging to his shoulders, water dripping from his hair into his eyes. He looked like he had been waiting for hours. Christine froze, the rain slicking her hair to her face. For a moment, neither moved. The only sound was the relentless drum of the storm. Finally, Ryan spoke, his voice rough but steady. "I know I shouldn't be here, but I didn't know where else to go." Christine's breath caught in her chest. Her first instinct was to turn away, to protect herself, to shut the door before he could break her open again. But something in his expression, tired, vulnerable, stripped of the composure he always carried, rooted her to the spot. "Why are you here, Ryan?" she asked quietly, rain dripping from her lashes. He stepped forward, then stopped short, as if afraid to cross some invisible line. His shoulders slumped under the weight of more than just water. "I didn't come to explain," he said. "I came to tell the truth." Christine's pulse hammered, but she stayed still, waiting. Ryan swallowed hard, his words unsteady but real. "I don't know how to love people the right way. I wasn't raised to. Most of my life has been spent in rooms where trust is just another currency, and everything has a cost. And then you—" His voice broke, and he pressed a hand against his brow as though steadying himself. "You didn't want anything from me. Not my money, not my name, just me. and that terrified me. Christine's throat tightened, but she said nothing. The storm raged around them, washing the world in white noise. Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in plastic. He held it out with trembling hands. "I found this behind the bar," he said. "I think you dropped it." Christine frowned, confused, until she saw what it was. A photograph, faded but lovingly restored. Her mother's smiling face, clearer than she had seen it in years. Her breath hitched. "My photo," she whispered. She had carried it in her apron pocket for years, thought she'd lost it weeks ago. "I had it cleaned up," Ryan said softly. "Didn't know if I'd ever get the chance to give it back, but I hoped." Christine clutched it to her chest, the plastic crinkling against her trembling fingers. Tears burned her eyes before she could stop them. "You kept this?" He nodded, rain dripping from his chin. "Because it looked like it mattered, and because I needed to hold on to something that wasn't about me." The street lamp above them flickered, casting their shadows long and broken across the pavement. Christine's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Why now?" Ryan's gaze locked onto hers, raw and unguarded. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you, about how you talked to people in pain, how you gave without asking, how you saved me that night in the bar and didn't even ask my name." He took a shaky breath. "I've lost a lot in my life, Christine. Some I let go, some I ran from. But if I walk away from this," his voice cracked, then steadied. "If I walk away from you, I'll be letting go of the only thing that truly matters." The silence that followed was louder than any confession. Christine stood still, rain soaking through her jacket, the photo pressed to her heart. Her mind screamed with every reason to turn him away, to protect herself, to keep the walls high. But her body betrayed her, the ache in her chest, the tears spilling down her cheeks the way her legs carried her one step closer. Ryan didn't move. True to his word, he didn't reach for her. He simply stood there, arms at his sides, eyes wide open, offering nothing but his broken honesty. It was the stillness that undid her. Not the speech, not the photograph, the stillness. The quiet surrender of a man with nothing left to prove and everything to hope for. Slowly, carefully, Christine stepped forward. She stopped just inches away, her breath mingling with his in the cold night air. Then, without a word, she leaned into him, her forehead resting against his damp shoulder. Ryan's breath caught. He didn't move, didn't dare, until he felt her fingers curl lightly against his sleeve. Then, as if the storm itself sighed in relief, he exhaled. They stood like that under the rain, two broken people, no longer strangers, no longer pretending, just two hearts, weary but still beating, finally finding rhythm together. For the first time in years, Christine felt safe, and for the first time in his life, Ryan allowed himself to hope. 6 months after that night in the rain, Hale's place didn't look the same. The neon still flickered, the music still pulsed, but something gentler lived beneath the noise now. A shelf of donated books stood by the entrance with a sign that read, "Take one, leave one." Along the back wall hung pencil sketches and paintings, most of them Christine's. Once a month the bar lights dimmed early, the tables pushed aside, and the space filled with quiet conversations about healing, grief, and starting over. Christine never wore a microphone. She just spoke the way she always had, honest, unpolished, steady. And people listened. In the daylight, she was back at school. She had re-enrolled in her psychology program, this time not just for her mother's promise, but for herself. Her tuition was mysteriously covered by an anonymous scholarship. Christine never asked who, but when she saw Ryan waiting outside campus every Thursday to walk her home, she already knew. 2 years later, Christine walked across the graduation stage. The crowd applauded, but her eyes found Ryan standing at the edge, hands in his pockets, smiling like she was the only person in the world. Their wedding came quietly. No lavish ballroom, no boardroom guests, just string lights in the backyard of Hale's place, the staff she once worked beside, a handful of her classmates, and a framed photo of her mother with a candle glowing beside it. Christine wore a pale dress the color of late summer skies. Ryan wore no tie. They danced barefoot, and when he kissed her forehead, it didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like a homecoming. 3 years later, their daughter Grace was born. Christine cradled her in trembling arms, whispering, "You're the gift we never thought we deserved." Their home wasn't perfect, mismatched furniture, late bills, paint that needed touching up, but it was alive. Laughter in the hallways, Drawings on the walls, the smell of coffee and cinnamon in the mornings. Above the living room couch hung one of Christine's sketches. At first, it had been a single figure in a bar booth, shadows curling around him, a glass untouched in front of him. Later, she added a second figure reaching out, light spilling across the table. Beneath it, in her own handwriting, she had written, "Sometimes the light begins where the darkness ends." That became their story. The lesson wasn't about chance encounters or fairy tale endings. It was about courage. The courage to see someone not for what they had or who the world thought they were, but for the storms they had survived. It was about believing that even the most guarded hearts still long for connection. Christine once thought life would always be survival, double shifts, silence, loneliness. Ryan once thought power was the only armor he could trust, but together they learned that healing doesn't come from walls. It comes from being seen, even in your brokenness, and choosing to stay anyway. Because in the end, love isn't about saving someone, it's about reminding them they were never lost to begin with.